Hey, Craig.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey, thank you for joining me today. I really think that it'll be really nice to show people how to use Amazon Web Services, and you've always been such a great guest. I love the way you interact and ask questions. It's the perfect speed. So I really appreciate your helping today. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and just to give you an overview of what I want to cover. So the agenda for today is going to be two things. We're going to configure an instance of Amazon. And we're going to use the web interface. There are two texts there that I have no idea where they came from. My apologies. There, that will be clearer. And the next thing that I want to do is, so really the size, the storage, etc. That's what's going to be done with the Amazon. You know, when we configure it, we choose things like the flavor, the size, how big it is, things like that. And after we're done actually configuring the instance, then we want to connect to it. And connecting to the instance is done through SSH. So I know you're not using Windows, which is good because it'll make it a lot easier to explain. It's always a little different, and actually using a PEM SSH key is something that's so special and different on Windows. I'd like to avoid it. But for everyone else and the rest of us, like for example, if you just have a command line tool, and if you're using tools to access it, it's the SSH command. And you know, Unix, Linux, Mac OS 10, all of those things will be able to use that tool just fine. But we have to actually learn to do that through the command line. And why are we learning to do these things is that there are a lot of other things that depend on it. If you're doing, like for example, an Ansible training class, you will want to SSH to that instance, and Ansible underneath actually uses SSH. So once we get this done, it opens up not just how to build an instance, but many other things that we can do. Make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Okay, so we're going to configure, and we're going to connect. That's all we're going to try to get done today. The configuration is done with the web, and really it's just a set of choices, a lot of clicking. So before I just start clicking away, I'm kind of giving you an overview of the choices that we have to make, and the concepts of those choices. So the first thing that it gives you in the very, very beginning when you're making an instance is an AMI. That is basically the flavor. You know, is it going to be a certain type of Unix? Is it going to be 32 or 64-bit? Is it going to be a Windows box behind the scenes? Is it going to be like what kind of, like if you would imagine, like if you're building something from scratch manually, what CD or DVD do you put in the machine to get it to start up to build that base OS? That's what I mean by the flavor, or Amazon machine. I always get this. It's a machine image. I call it an instance, but Amazon machine image, I think, is what the AMI stands for. But it's the flavor. It's like the disk that you boot from that's already pre-built. The next choice that we're going to have to make is size. Is it going to be a big machine, a small machine? You know, the bigger it is, the more it's going to cost. And the smaller it is, if you're a first-time user that hasn't done this before, Amazon will give you a free micro instance, the smallest that you can get. As long as you just have one free micro instance using the flavors that they approve, that can be free, then you can have that free for a year to learn how this works. And the idea is they're not going to charge you for how to learn how to use their stuff. They want people to learn how so that they can charge you down the road when you use it for bigger and better things. The third thing is going to be some machine details, some tweaks. Honestly, we're not going to tweak anything. Maybe one option if we choose to. But that's an option we're going to get. How do you tweak and change the machine? The next option is going to be the hard disk. So what hard disk is going to be used? Is it going to be 8 gigs, 150 gigs? You know, you can choose that. Some options are coming in that are fairly new. Also, is it going to be solid state? Is it going to be an SSD, or is it going to be the old-fashioned kind? That's actually an option that's changing as well. Tags, you can ignore the tags, but it's like a big label maker. You can kind of print out labels for every little piece of it. And if you're like me, it gives me a sense of order to label everything. Also, I can figure out what the heck was I thinking when I built that disk. Does that disk go to that machine? So it's nice to actually label things as you go. And there's a default label for name with a capital N, and we'll see that. And you can just name everything that way. But you can also, you know, print out your own labels of anything you want and stick them anywhere you want. The next piece is the security group. And the security group is actually pretty important because it's like the firewall, and you want to be able to get the firewall to let you connect to the machine. People confuse security group and keys are the two areas that people get the most confused when building their first instance. So we'll spend some time going over the security group and what that means. And finally, of course, is how to build your own key. That's the key that you're going to need to have access to, and the key that we'll use for the next part. So moving to the next part, connecting to that instance from the command line. We're going to type on the command line, and I will share that and how I'm doing it. Also, access keys. So you just downloaded a key file, and there are two things that you should really know about how that key file is made, at least for the example images that we're going to use. And that is always associated to the EC2 user account. It's a special account made up by Amazon. Their service is called EC2, and we'll see what that is. But that's a EC2-user is a name you should have kind of written down or memorized to be your account name. It's only special for the key that they make for you. And ideally, for good security reasons, you don't ever use that except for upgrading, changing, etc. So you build your own accounts that don't use this key. But this key will only work for that user and no one else by default. And that's probably how you should keep it. But the biggest trip up for anyone else is when you download a file from the web, the permissions on any file downloaded from the web is pretty loose. You want to be able to share that file with other people pretty easily. And SSH, that's a security risk. So the SSH program says, nope, I am not going to connect. I'm going to throw my foot down until you actually learn to do this properly. I won't even connect until you change the permissions. And that's what most people see, and it can be very confusing. And finding the key file, where you downloaded it, can be very confusing for people. And finally, the syntax. Sorry about that. The syntax is going to be, how do I connect? So I'm going to SSH to, what is the SSH command going to be? What is that syntax? And we will come back and do that pretty regularly. So is that a reasonable overview? Does that make kind of sense?
It makes complete sense. I think we have a lot of questions as we go through the steps, but from an overview perspective, it makes a lot of sense.
Perfect. I love that you have questions. That's why you make such a perfect guest for something like this. I love it. All right, so that's our goal. That's what we're going to do. I am going to now share my screen for my Amazon Web instance. So you'll notice back on the slide, let me switch back to that slide just for a second, that there's a console. This is a web page that you get into from Amazon that lets you control everything. Amazon's really cool to let you do a lot of things, everything through code. And we do entire classes on coding, but on how to even code spinning up these instances. At the very beginning, this is like the first intro for anyone who wants to spin up an instance from scratch. Doing it through the web. You can't code it if you don't know how to do it by hand. So go to that console, or anyone who can go to console.aws.amazon.com, you'll have to create an account for the first time. Even though they give it to you for free, they still want to get your credit card. Later, they will instantly charge that card. That's how they work. But if you go to that console, it'll be very, very cheap, by the way, even if you do charge for it. If you only do one or two things and shut it down when we're done, we're talking about literally 1 cent, 2 cents. And I will help you and anyone watching know what not to do to get charged unnecessarily. But it'll be free as well if you've never used it before. So that's the place that you go as a console, and I'm going to assume that people will kind of muddle through, figure out how to, because it's going to change all the time, and it's going to depend upon their credit information, like their credit card that they put in. But they need to basically build an account, get signed up, and get to the Amazon console. So I'm going to switch over, assume that everyone can get that part done, and I'm going to switch to the Amazon console so that everyone can see what that would look like for me. 1 second. Okay, so this is a copy of my Amazon console. There are lots of different services, and it probably will start off with something maybe looking like this for the very first one, which can be so overwhelming. The biggest confusion when it comes to trying to figure, well, of the two I mentioned, which are very specific to how to build an instance, but the biggest confusion, like the fundamental first one, is what are all of these services? Amazon keeps changing so often. In fact, These screens that I'm sharing in the video will probably be different by the time someone looks at this video, because they are constantly updating and changing, which is good because of new things, but bad because it's hard to follow what's going on when things change and they move around. But this should at least give a fundamental for people as they're working through. So there are a million types of different services here. They've at least now grouped them into different categories. So computing and networking, this is the kind of stuff that we're going to do. So what we're looking for is one of these four options and how to do computing stuff. But quickly, to give you an example of other things, they also do storage. If you want to be able to store things up in the cloud for static files, they have these things called like S3 and all of these different acronyms that we'll go into more detail in a minute. But they do all kinds of storage and delivery. Something I see used probably the most besides the virtual machines is a database in the cloud. Instead of having to configure, manage, and be the database administrator, they do that for you automatically. And of your four different kinds of databases, the one you see a lot of is called RDS, so Relational Database Services. You'll notice that they'll come up with a lot of acronyms, and they just use those like they're just common, like everyone knows what they are. And I will probably do that without thinking about it, because you use this enough, you start thinking that way. RDS means their database service. S3, scalable storage something. You know, instead of just saying SSS or S something, they'll actually just take those and abbreviate them. Like S3 is scalable storage. I don't know what the other S would stand for. I should know, but I don't, because I just know what S3 means. It's like a great big static file bucket in the cloud. If you want to make a website and put it on the web, you can use S3 very cheaply with the same account. It doesn't have to be dynamic, just serve stuff. It is incredibly cheap and very stable and very reliable. And then back up to the computing, you'll notice there are just more things on the right, and I'm just not going to go into. They keep changing, and I'm not trying to explain everything today as an overview. I'm just going to kindly quickly go through all of the pieces and then focus on what we want. Is the EC2 is Elastic Compute Cloud. So again, instead of saying ECC, they're just going to say Compute Cloud, EC2, let's be clever. So EC2 is the one to remember. If nothing else, the high level of all of this, you can use all of these things for tons of other places, but EC2 is all about what we're trying to do today. And you'll notice if you click on the services at the top, this is a new menu where you can choose things. You can go in here and choose something like EC2 like I just did. Also, if I'm looking at things after I've done it, it's in my history, so I can just click straight there to go to EC2. So EC2, and I've actually made the screen a little bit smaller to try to squeeze it in, but I can make it bigger for a moment or two just to kind of have everyone see what's going on, is EC2 has these panels. Like all of these different services are specific to EC2. And all EC2 is a virtual machine. I want to get a new machine somewhere in the cloud, and I want to access it, and it's actually my machine. I can connect to it like any other machine I have at home, any server. I will create one through this interface, and it's real virtual, and then I connect to it. In fact, I have one running right now. I have one that's what I call my production web. It's very small, there's nothing much in it, and it's running. And I have something old that I need to label better that I had stopped that I need to probably come back and review, and I didn't want to throw it away yet. I just stopped it so I could go look at it. All right, so really, in summary, I log into the console, I go to Compute EC2. On EC2, I actually choose Instances, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time. There are lots of other things I can configure. Again, you have millions of options, but really all today's about is how to create your first instance, making it simple. Any questions so far?
Nope, that makes complete sense. And also, I like the fact that in the beginning you talked about the 3 services that you most commonly use. I think when I first took a look at the Amazon console, yeah, it was absolutely overwhelming. So knowing that EC2 is the most important, and then S3 and RDS are the other two, I think it helps a lot. So I think it's a really, really key point to emphasize.
Cool, thank you. I wouldn't say it's the most important. I would say more specifically it's the most important for us.
Yeah.
What we're wanting to cover.
Get started too, yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, for what we want to do and what we're trying to learn today, it would be EC2. When I first started, I actually did map reduce. That's what I learned to do on this. So it was actually different. There's actually a map reduce function from those services that you can do. So yeah, it depends on what we're trying to do. But yeah, EC2 is probably going to be the most common because it's the virtual machine. S3 you probably won't use as much, but if you just wanted a website, you could. And RDS is the most common. So if you're building a website through, like if you're going to take a course on how to build Django website or a Rails website that we're doing, then you're going to use EC2 and RDS. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. That was pretty good. All right. So I am going to launch an instance, and we're going to walk through the creation of that instance. Things get really big on the screen. That's why. So I'm going to probably have to minimize things at some point to make them a little smaller so they can all fit, because this is a pretty busy panel. So I'm going to go ahead and close the stuff on the left so I can see. Like if I want to, I can get it back. But I'm not going to change off of EC2, so I'm going to move that off so it's easier for me to see everything on the screen. And really, that also brings us down to only thing we're going to click on is the launch instance. It's the only big blue call to action button on the screen, so it's pretty easy to see. This is how we're going to launch an instance. Now, don't forget, there's several choices we're going to go through. And so I could just launch and let it choose for me, but I'm really hoping to go through each of the steps so that people can understand how that works. Okay? And you'll notice that these steps are actually right across the top. In fact, this looks almost exactly like what was in my slide. I think I now have made it small enough I can make that bigger to see. Where you see choose AMI is the first choice. Again, that's the flavor. What they're calling instance type is how big is it. The bigger it is, the more powerful it is, the more it will cost. But you can also have that power. And there are some things that are so huge, it's like supercomputer size. Configure the instance, that's all those details we just mentioned that we're going to go through, all of those very specific things. Most of those defaults are fine. Add storage, this is where we put more hard disk in, take hard disk out, configure things, make it SSD, make it regular. Tag instance, that's our big label maker. That's where we're going to actually try to kind of keep track of things so that later when someone else logs into our console and we're sharing with the team, they're like, what did you do? What is that machine for? I don't understand. At least or if it's us and we don't remember what we did, we can tag it to know. Security group is the next important piece. Security group is probably the most important part to go into details on, because it's how you it's the firewall. It's how we're going to connect to it. And finally, there's a review part. We haven't made a key yet in this step because actually using the keys comes after the machine is built. It's actually they put a key on at the very last. So it reviews, then asks you to launch, and then we actually go in and we try to create a key and use that key. All right, so we're in the first step of AMIs. I've kind of reviewed the same thing before, but still I think we're pretty good on AMIs, or on what the overview is. So I'm going to focus on AMI. There are lots of different flavors you can choose from. If you're just super into Red Hat Enterprise, because you have to use it for work and you have to have that license, you can use Red Hat Enterprise. If you just are a Ubuntu person and you think Ubuntu is the coolest thing, then you should be able to use Ubuntu. Notice that these come with SSD volumes and stuff now, so each of these flavors change a lot. So this screen will be very different over time, but it's the same general choices. Microsoft, if you were like, I need to have a Microsoft server running this patch, and I want to have SQL Server running on it, you can have those choices too. They'll be a little bit more expensive because there's a licensing involved. Oh, I haven't seen this before, but now there's a free tier Microsoft Windows. See, it changes things all the time. This surprised me. I didn't see this. Normally you would have to pay for Microsoft Windows Server, but look, it says free tier eligible at this time. This will be very different if you're watching this sometime after the fact, because they'll change all the time. But free tier eligible for Microsoft is actually a bonus. It means you can have a Microsoft free running for a year, a really small one, and see what's going on. Oh, there are a couple others too. Wow, I must just have never noticed that. I'm not a big Windows person. I don't use a lot of that. And you'll see that we just have more and more choices as we go down. I like the top choice. Amazon Linux AMI is what I'm going to use for all of my demos for all the classes that I go through with people, and I have a couple of reasons for that. One, it is really nothing but the free version of your Red Hat Enterprise. It is the Red Hat Enterprise is like the one that you commercially, like people who run data centers typically will use, but it has a licensing and a cost. That's how Red Hat makes money. There's a free version of that because Red Hat's actually built on open source. Of course, there's a free version that they help with. And that open source version is called CentOS, CENTOS. And Amazon Linux is really just that CentOS version with a little bit of pretty flavor and a new nice Amazon label on top of it. That's all it is. So it's pretty compatible with most of the industrial things that are out there. I'm going to choose this one, and for all of the demos I ask people to choose this one only because you have to pick a standard and keep going. Otherwise, little things like package management and other things will change all the time. Make sense?
Makes total sense. And again, this is really helpful because it's like I think there's always that challenge when you're doing something for the first time and you're given all these different options. It becomes very confusing which one to choose, and you get hung up on that. So
yeah.
Really useful. So if in doubt, that this is clearly the flavor to pick if you're unsure.
It's the flavor to pick if you want to work with Glenn. That's it's not any better than other things, but it is also the flavor that Amazon has picked. So that helps too. So yeah, if you're unsure, pick this one. But that doesn't mean that if you're an Ubuntu, if your boss says it has to be all Ubuntu, then obviously that that choice will have to go to Ubuntu. If you're working with an Ubuntu group, then it has to be Ubuntu. But yeah, definitely if you're unsure and you just don't know and it doesn't matter, pick this one. Now, with that said, Amazon's also giving you the whole look. I'm not going to make you configure everything. If you want to just pick something, click the big blue call to action button. It's blue to say, click this. Don't. If you're watching the video, don't. I want you to stop and go through everything else. But if you happen to not know and not care and forget and you want to just let it choose everything for you, clicking review and launch will let it just basically choose everything for you. And then it'll just launch that instance. I personally would not want to. Because I want to be able to understand each of the pieces, and some of its automatic choices can be very cumbersome down the road. Like if you have a security group for 100 machines and they keep getting created and thrown around, you'll have 100 security groups and don't know what they're all for. All right? Instance type. It's different than AMI. AMI is like what image, what CD, what goes into the thing, what operating system goes in. Type, I almost want to say size. They say type because it's more than just size. It also has some configuration. For example, general purpose T2 micro. So the micro is obviously the size part. They also have M2. M kind of stands for memory. So if you want a little bit more, this is a medium, but it's also specialized in memory. This is a large specialized in memory. This is an extra large with specialized in memory. So that's what those first things mean. So I don't think that's as important. At least not for today. Look, you have an 8 extra large. That's huge. And those are SSD drives. I mean, that's a really big machine. You can get extra larges, and they're going to be very expensive. But they're entire companies are running on things like that. So, top of the list is my choice for several reasons. One, see that green free tier eligible? If you choose all of these options, and you're using this for the first time, you can play for 1 whole year and not get charged anything at all. Now let's assume that by choosing, for example, the AMI I just mentioned, the size that I just mentioned, all of these free tier eligible. If you choose free tier eligible for everything, it won't cost you anything at all. Now let's say that you make all of the choices now and your year is up. You've already done this before and forgotten about it, and now your year is up and you don't get it for free. For all of these choices, it still costs less than $19 a month. And that's assuming it's running all the time. If you run it just for this class and shut it down when we're done, it actually is 1 cent the entire hour. If you just take, add up 1 cent per hour, or I can't remember the exact price now because it keeps changing, but whatever that is, I said 1 cent per hour. I know $19 a month is exactly right. So take 19 hours a month, divide that by the number of hours in the month, and that's the actual price that you'll be paying. But since we'll be using it just for one little class, it's nothing. All right, so this is the size. I want to pick this one. It's the really, really small one. Lots of different things. My network performance is going to be terrible. I don't care. I'm not doing anything big. I'm going to have a very small amount of memory. Number of virtual CPUs is small. I mean, it's free for a reason. It's tiny. But for what we care about, it's perfectly adequate. You won't actually see it for most things. You're not doing that much computation. Can I go to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Review and launch is bad. No, it's not actually. It's bad for today. I shouldn't have said it that way. I don't want you to click review and launch, even though it's like calling you. I want you to click configure the instance details. I want to keep configuring it. I don't want to just cut to the end and just go. So configure the instance details. There are a lot of things that may not make a lot of sense here. If I want to launch 100 of these, I actually can put 100 right here. It will launch 100 of these, and that will be very expensive by the end of the month. I only want one. Only one comes free. There are lots of options that can get confusing for later. We're going to choose just let all of those default options happen. The only one I probably care about even explaining right now is shutdown behavior. I can choose to let the machine shut down, like when the machine is shut down, like let's say you do a shutdown -R in your Unix, the machine can just stop and sit there waiting for you to start it up again, like if you shut down a real machine. Or it can actually just go away once you've done your work. Like if you're doing a huge bunch of MapReduce and you want to spin up 500 machines to do something, and when they're done, you're finished with them. They've sent the results to someone. They can just disappear. They will terminate. That machine is actually destroyed and doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to choose stop. I think that's always better. It's small enough, and I want to see what's going on. And to have a machine suddenly disappear would be very confusing, at least at this stage. Oh, and I really, really, really did not want to make that change. I don't know how that happened. I was pressing on buttons at the time. I'm glad I caught that. If I would have had that many instances in this talk, I would have gone crazy. So one instance is good. All right, add storage. So the next part, right across the top, we've chosen the flavor, we've chosen small, we've really not changed any configuration, and now we're going to look at the hard drive that is getting added. And I'm just going to make sure that really does say just one. Okay, good. Okay, kind of freaky for a second. All right, so this is the amount of storage that you're going to have. It is, you have a couple of choices, and again, these screens change all the time. It was just in the last few weeks that we just saw volume type has changed. Now it's not just magnetic by default, but you can have general purpose SSD, provisioned SSD, which has to do with some IOPS stuff. Its performance stuff can come in, can greatly impact things like if you're running a MongoDB and things like that. But for now, I'm just going to say magnetic, leave it by default. SSD, I think they were giving it to you for free as well, but I'm just going to leave the default of magnetic. I prefer that for what we're doing. I don't need the SSD. Size, I could say 100 gigs, 500 gigs. I think there is also a limit on how much your size is for getting the free, but I can't remember. We're not going to need more than 8, so it doesn't matter. We're going to leave it the default of 8. I just wanted to review it. Again, if I wanted to have that hard drive just delete, when the machine's deleted and I want that hard drive to stick around, or have it delete on termination, I can have the machine delete but keep the hard drive for review if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave all this as default. Come back to ideas of snapshot another day. It's an important concept, but it can be overwhelming to give you too much today. Any questions so far?
Nope.
Okay. I'm going to now go to the next part, and that's tagging, the label machine. Now, it's very confusing to realize that some people, I have seen this a lot, where people don't realize that this is if you're imagining this, if you're a Python programmer, think of this or as a key value store, or if you're a database programmer, this is key and this is value. If you're a Python, it's a dictionary of key and value. If you're a Ruby programmer, this is a hash and this is the key and then the value. So it seems like people want to label down. If I create a couple of these things, it's easy to want to label down, like the name of my instance is Fred. No. The value is here. So key on the left, value on the right. So the name of this is going to be Demo with Craig. And I don't need this extra label, but I'm going to also say, give me a label name, any kind of label name, it doesn't matter.
Setup type.
Setup type, I like that. And let's say the type is automatic. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know, whatever these labels are the things we're putting on it, so it doesn't matter. Now, let's go to the next part. We're going to do some security group. And this is the part that can get a little confusing because it wants to say, hey, do you want us to make this one automatically for you? And every instance can have their own security group. Don't forget, security group is nothing but a firewall. The firewall is kind of like external to the machine, so you can kind of mix and match them. Having a firewall of Launch Wizard 1 is so not helpful. So what is my firewall going to be? Is it going to be a web server? Then I might want to have a web firewall. I might call it something like that. And this description should, can be something more like only web traffic is allowed. Something more meaningful than just these wizards. And if you were to choose the automatic, you would get a lot of those, and they would be tied to the different machines, and you would just have to go look at the machine and see which one's up. Personally, most of my machines are all going to have similar flavors, so I don't need, if I'm going to have 5 different web servers, they can all share the same firewall because it's exactly the same. If they were all different, then I can have different ones. Typically, I have one firewall, and that firewall is going to be for my production stuff. Well, that's not true. I also have a staging firewall for things, but I don't always. I don't always have it. Sometimes I delete it, depending upon what staging systems that I need to have spun up. But the things I want to do that I don't want to open my security group, my production firewall to. Again, I'm saying firewall and security group, they're synonymous. Saying security group, even though it's supposed to make that seem easier, maybe because I've seen the word firewall so often, it confused me. So security group is like the security permissions, just like firewall, whichever word makes sense to you. But they are really, really the same idea. And so I'm going to make a new one for today, just to show that we have, not reuse an old one. And I'm going to say that firewall, or that security group, is going to be Craig Demo Firewall. And I can't say only web traffic is involved because I need to SSH to that machine. So SSH only, no, let's say SSH and web, just to demonstrate. So those are the name and descriptions. Now, I want to SSH, but do I want to let anyone in the world SSH to it? That can be very dangerous. I can actually just say, no, just allow SSHing from my IP address. If I do that, and then I go to work, and I can't access the box, why can't I get in? I have a different IP address. So I could add a second SSH for a custom IP. And let's pretend that my work IP address is very similar, but it is 82. Let's pretend that those are my home and work IP addresses. And then those are the 2 options that are available to me. For simplicity, I'm going to leave it as anywhere. Anyone can access anywhere. This is a demo to try to make it easy for you, but obviously, and you can change this later. In fact, that's the point of having security groups. They can be configured later. But you obviously do not want having SSH allowed from anyone is just asking for it. For now, I'm doing it just to make it simple. If I left it there for anything production, I would so be asking for it. But I also want to add web. How would I add web to this one to keep it interactive? Craig, can you help me?
Yes, for web, let's see. So you'd create a separate group. I would imagine you'd want.
Well, in this group, I want to add, like, this group is going to have, I call it demo, but it has SSH and web access. So I want to add a rule for web here.
What are the options for?
Let's see. I have SSH, SMTP, DNS, HTTP, POP. Oh, that's the one, HTTP.
Yeah.
I want to allow HTTP. And so notice that that's, we all know that's port 80. Now, I think it's not dangerous to have HTTP from different places. Well, it can be actually for a lot of scrapers. But I want to allow everyone in the world to see my wonderful new thing that I'm creating. Also, let's add a rule for HTTPS. We want them to be able to access our machine as well. So an HTTPS is obviously much more secure than HTTP, so let's allow that. And that can be from anywhere as well. Any questions on how I configured the security group and what I'm doing with the security group?
Nope.
Okay, so I have a name and a description, and then I just configure the permissions that I want. This security group will be added to my instance that I'm creating, but I can reuse, for a new instance, I can reuse the same security group and tie it to another instance, just connect it to another instance that I'm creating too. And it'll just allow only these things through. I'm going to go ahead and review. Oh, now we have no more choices but to review and launch. We're almost done. Now, here's where we're getting the choice. By the way, your general purpose SSD, it gave me a choice of magnetic by default, but then now it's saying, hey, by the way, free people can still get up to 30 gigs of SSD. They're kind of pushing SSD. I don't care. For this demo, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to use that speed for booting. It's going to boot so fast, I won't get to it before it actually happens. All right, if I were working on production instance, that's really important because SSD is faster than magnetic. All right, and it's also new, so they're kind of pushing it a little bit. All right, I'm going to click Next, and now I'm in the review step. Everything that I chose is now in front of me with a couple of warnings. Hey, your security group demo is open to the world. Are you sure you want to do that? Like we said, that could be dangerous, especially for SSH. But I'm going to do a couple of very dangerous things today just to demonstrate. There's a demo. The instance, so it's going to be an Amazon flavor. It's going to be micro small, which is free tier as well. Security groups are already configured. The instance details, I'll have one good. I didn't actually accidentally choose 999 of them. It's going to be a hard drive. It's going to be Ethernet automatically assigned. Its hard drive is 8 gigs. I have tagged it with 2 tags, a name of demo with Craig, and a setup of automatic. At this point, I can't think of anything else to review. It's configured the best I can get, unless you can think of something.
Nope, it makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, I'm going to launch it, but it doesn't actually launch the first time. It's going to say, whoa, what key do you want to put on it? It's all configured. Now it wants to throw a key at me. Don't forget, this key is like the fundamental piece. Key is going to give you access to the machine, and only you should have this key. Also, your firewall will allow access through. So you have to have the firewall open so that you can get to the SSH part. And you also have to have this key. If you don't have both of those things, you'll never be able to connect. In fact, Amazon says, by acknowledging that I have access to the selected private key file, that I won't be able to log into my instance ever, and that I acknowledge that's the case, and there's nothing they can ever do about it. It's like, if you lose this key, you're done. The idea, if they could fix it, if they could basically replace the key with something else, and there's this, so hacker can do the same thing they just did and make it, get around your key. The point of this is to be super secure. Now, I'm not going to use my prod key, especially. Oh, and it looks like I forgot one to delete a test key. We'll ignore that one. I'm going to create a brand new key, and I'm going to call it Craig Demo.
Sounds good.
Okay. Now I'm going to download this key pair, and it gets very confusing on where this key pair goes, because I can't help people know where all files download on their system. Some people will have it in a downloads folder, other people will have it on their desktop. It's going to depend on where everyone goes. On a Macintosh like I'm using, it goes into my downloads folder. So I'm going to go ahead and download this. Okay, and so I get my key. I at least have an indicator on the left of my browser. Can you see that in this window?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, good. So that left of the browser is going to be where it is, and you won't be able to see what I'm doing, but I'm going to drag that key out to my desktop, just so I absolutely have it here and I can show to people. In fact, I won't wait. I'm going to leave it in downloads, and I will share my whole screen and show you how I download it to the desktop, just to get to it. All right. All right, so I think we're ready. Do you want to launch the instance?
Let's go for it.
All right, we have spent quite a bit of time talking about it, but it's so fast done. The instance is ready, by the way. That's pretty quick. So let's go look at EC2. Look at instances. Oops. And there is another instance right here called Demo with Craig, and look, it is running. Didn't take long, did it?
Hooray.
Yeah, I think the SSD, for example, it made such a small difference because it's so fast for what we're doing. It's such a small instance, and there's not much on it. All right, here's where sharing top and bottom screen gets a little harder, so I'm going to minimize to the left again, drag this panel up so you can see below. When I click on Demo with Craig, its detail shows below right there. And just for a second, I'm going to drag it even further up so I can see everything in here. And you'll notice there's a lot of stuff. All the stuff that we configured, plus a lot of stuff that we haven't, is all available to me. It can be very confusing on how much stuff is there. And this is all just the description tag. Really, the part I care about for today is public. Be warned, there's a private IP address for security. That's not the one I mean. I mean the public IP address. This public IP address right here is, you can see that highlighted?
Mm-hmm.
That's the IP address that we're going to need. We're going to need two things. We're going to need three things, really. We're going to need the key, the account, and the IP address. And the two things that I don't have memorized are the key and the public IP address. All right, so at that point, we've configured an instance. If I have only one running, it will be free. If I have two, like now, I'm actually being charged, and it's too late, I've already spun it up, so I've been charged 1 cent for the entire hour. So that's 1 penny, I think I can afford it. All right, so if I were to give this to you and say, I want you to spin up a new instance, could you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And remind me before we're done that I want to show how to shut down this instance so that people don't get stuck with an instance they're not using and they have to pay for over time. All right, so I'm now going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm going to go to my desktop. Probably I will share a terminal screen. Okay, 1 second. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to open a terminal window. I'm going to make it bigger so that people can see it. So I should probably share that terminal. I'm going to change that prompt so that it is easier to see what's on my screen. How's that?
Looks great.
Okay. I originally said I was going to drag a key to my desktop. I didn't do it yet. I thought I'd wait and let everyone see what I was doing. It's still in my download folder. In fact, it's probably a good idea to show it and leave it in my downloads folder. So just to prove the point that it really is there, that's where we downloaded it from. Now, this is my key file. If I were to try to access the machine, just like an email, if I were to try to email you, I would need two things are in an email address. For example, this is my email address. Mm-hmm. But two things are there. There's the who. You type who. And there is the place. Pretty much like a post office box is going to be like who are you at what post office box number at what post office box. Okay, so if I'm going to try to connect to this, I need to say who at what location on the internet. And this place is internet place. And who is like the person. Do you remember who is the default? For this key that we have, who is the account that we've created? It's always done automatically for you, and it's an account we have to kind of memorize. Do you remember the name?
Oh, shoot, I've forgotten the name. But
That's okay. That's okay. You'll be typing it so often.
It's 11 o'clock.
You'll be typing it so often it'll come up a lot. EC2-user. That's the actual name. And why EC2? That's EC2 virtual machine user. It's not always that. Depending upon the flavor, sometimes they actually say root. Actually, EC2's user is more secure because you're not actually going in directly as root. You still have access to root, but you have to go through a few more hoops to get there. So this is the part to tell you who. Mm-hmm. The part to tell me where. What internet place is it?
The public IP?
Yes, it's the public IP. I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to flip back for a second to that other window. You can't see me flipping, but I just went back to the one that we looked at. But I can't find it. Give me a second. There's my management console. Okay, demo with Craig, and I am going to pull out his public IP. It's the one that's in the video earlier that you just saw. And I'm going to copy it. It's 54.210.15.17. So 54.210.15.17. So if I want to connect to a box, I have to SSH, that's the command to say, secure connect me, secure shell me over to who at what. There's another gotcha. Actually, there are several more coming. The next gotcha is this EC2 user, when did we set a password for it?
Yeah.
Huh?
You need to use you need some sort of credentials, right?
Yeah, did we ever set a password for that account?
I don't think so.
No, and it's not an automatic one. If there was a default one, then people would forget to change it, and it would be another security hole. So, in fact, EC2 user does not accept a password. It's like, nope, not even going to do it. You need a special key to get to me. A key that's not even transmitted over the wire like a password is, because we're going to be super secure about that. And guess what that key is? The key is the file we downloaded. This is the why we downloaded the file. That's the key, the PEM key, to be able to get to that machine. But I have to give one more option to say that's the key. I stands for identity. So what identity, what key do I need to access for? So SSH minus I, the key that you just downloaded, user, which is we know is EC2 user, at public IP address. Starting to sound complicated, so I want to pause for a second. Anything I can do to make that clear?
Well, I have a general question. So,
sure.
In this case, you have your key in the downloads folder.
Right.
So I imagine it's probably not the safest place you want to put your keys, because you might, delete all of the items in your downloads folder. So where would you normally store the key? Would you create a...
Where would I keep them? I'm a little kind of super, tin hat paranoid about my keys, so I'm not sure. Where does a normal person keep them, or where do I keep them? A normal person is probably going to keep them in another location. Like sometimes, if it's a pretty insecure thing, I'll use my .ssh. Like every home directory has a .ssh, and that's where keys normally go on your system.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that this one's actually set up for a work account and nothing to do. It's pretty I didn't care much about them. So you can actually make a subdirectory inside of that. I will sometimes do for PEMs. In fact, I have. For this particular one, I have made a PEM file, I think. Oh, I guess I did not. For some of them, I'll actually keep a subdirectory of PEMs, and I'll put some in there. But where does a tin hat person like me keep them? I don't actually keep them on my computer. I keep them on a thumb drive that's external. It's in my pocket all the time. It's actually on my key ring, my physical key ring. And when I want to connect to it, I plug in my thumb drive, and it mounts to a physical system. Like, for example, I reset this pointer. This doesn't exist anymore. But I would do a link, and I have some of this automated. So to basically say, path to my tin hat PEM thumb drive, and then I would just say that. So we would create a link to that location, so that my SSH directories, and then every time if I keep that, which is what I normally do when I'm not doing something like this, working for another company or trying to do something else, because I keep them separated, then all I have to do is plug in my drive, and that link, when it mounts, that link automatically shows up, and I take it out when I'm done. So it depends on the security level you care about. But you're right, keeping it downloads is probably a bad idea. But you know what? I created this key just to throw it away, and I will actually even show the contents of this key at some point in the demo. And so I've had people alert me saying, by the way, you shared your public key, anyone can get to that. Yes, that's true, but I'm throwing all of this away in half an hour, and it's not anything on there that I care about. So it depends. Like anything, security and convenience are exact opposites. You always have to pick a slider. Which would you want? More convenient, more secure. It totally depends on what you're trying to do. Does that help? Did I answer the question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I had something on my screen that I'd lost because I had forgotten. Here we go. I'm going to copy this. Okay. On my screen. Can you see that? Ooh, I did not mean to do that. You can see that?
Yep.
I didn't mean to press enter yet. But SSH minus I, Craig demo is the key, so I is identity. User is EC2 user at 54 dot whatever. I'm surprised I didn't get a bigger error yet. I was going to ask you, do you think this will work? And I'll ask you now, do you think this will work? Do you think we're going to completely get connected to the machine?
I think so, but I feel like this is a trick question. So.
It's definitely a trick question. Now, I could be wrong because I was surprised we got this far.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, when you download keys, the file permission on that key is too insecure. So it should complain, yeah, I'm not going to let you connect. I didn't think I would get this far, but maybe I did. This we'll have to look at. So what is this message for? The first time I ever connect to a machine, ever, it doesn't know who that machine is. It's never, my computer has never met that other computer.
Mm-hmm.
So, if they've met each other, they can recognize each other. And they can say, oh, no, you're looking at 542101517, but let me tell you, I know what 542101517 looks like. He's a little taller than that. No, 542171517 is not who you think it is, even though even though that's the right name, it's not the right person, or not the right machine. Mm-hmm. They're smart enough underneath that can do that. But the very first time, they've never seen each other before. They don't know. So they have to basically say, this guy, the authenticity can't be established. I haven't seen him before. Do you want me to continue? And unless you have a way of securely getting them to meet on the internet, which would be physically putting them together, it's not possible. The very first time you have to trust. And then no, they will, unless you get this message unexpectedly, like you have connected before, you should recognize him, then you can ignore this the first time. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to say yes, and hope I get a big nasty error. Interesting. I think it stopped giving me a big nasty error anymore. Let me try again, just to be sure it wasn't a delay on my... Yeah, there we go. There's the big nasty error. I didn't get it last time because it took so long to say yes, they kind of gave up on me. This is one of the biggest gotchas. So of the 3 biggest gotchas, not setting up your security group properly. By default, if you just accept it, you're fine. Mm-hmm. This one, though, when people download the files, they get a great big nasty message like this because by default, this file is too insecure. Not only is it in a weird place, but the permissions in the file are way too insecure. Mm-hmm. And SSH is saying, no, I refuse. In fact, it's even telling you right now what the problem is. Even though this warning is so big that it stands out, unprotected, it's really this that's telling you what the problem is. Mm-hmm. So how would I look at the permissions on that file? Let me think. I'm going to look at it. Can you tell what the permissions are? I'm not sure if you've done a lot of permissions on files for Unix.
Yes. So of those that first set of letters, mm-hmm. if I remember correctly, it's read, write, execute for 3 different levels of security. Is it like admin, group, and then all?
Exactly right. Well, yeah, same concept. And if I go this, it's me as a user, and if I happen to be logged in as root, then yes, it would be admin. But me as a user, or me that only I, whoever I am, which right now is Glenn Jarvis. No, that's minus L again. So me as a user, I have read and write permissions on that file. I don't have execute because this doesn't make sense for a key. Mm-hmm. But I have read and write access. That alone is not a problem. But anyone who's in my same group can read that file. Okay, well, I don't have anyone else in the shared group. Mm-hmm. Back in the old days, we used to actually work on the same servers a lot and work as teams so that people would have like a very simple way of saying you can get to these because you're in the same group, and so I will share this file with you, but not that file because my group has this permission. Mm-hmm. And this is saying anyone in the entire system. I don't care who you are. You can be a guest on the system, and you can actually still read my file. This is a private key file. You would never want to do what I'm about to do, ever, ever, ever. Well, not on a Hangout where people can see it. I'm going to show you the contents of this file. Anyone who could read this could actually type all of these characters in exactly like this and have my file and connect to that machine on that IP address. Now, if they can do that before we end this video, I'll be super impressed. But because I'm throwing all of this away as soon as we're done. But this is a private key file. To be able to mathematically predict all of this from not ever seeing it, from actually some mathematical computations on another file, is practically impossible. It's getting better, but still very, very practically at least impossible. It's very impractical to be able to do something like that. So that is my key file that now everyone on the internet has seen if they want to watch this video, but I'm throwing it away. And also anyone on my system could see. And so therefore anyone could connect to my machine. They wouldn't have to need to do it. So I'm going to now change permissions on this file. And there are lots of ways to do it. Instead of explaining the binary math, I like explaining it this way because if you've not done it before, it's actually easier to start with. I'm going to change permissions. Okay, which permissions was this? This was the group permissions. Mm-hmm. And this one was everyone, but they actually call it other permissions. Am I going to give or take away? Am I giving permissions or am I taking away permissions?
You're taking away permissions.
Okay. So I'm going to use a minus, not a plus. And of those permissions, what do I want? What permissions does group and other have that I want to take away?
Read.
All right. So go for group and other minus read on that file. Ready? Shall I click the button?
Go for it.
Okay. Now if I look at that, I no longer have problems with the file. That alone has been the biggest gotcha for people trying to learn to connect through Amazon instances. Of all of them, it's the one that people trip on the most. Maybe it's not the biggest security risk when it comes to this, but it's the most confusing because people don't know that they have to change the permissions. Some big message doesn't actually tell you what to do. So now, if I were to go back to this command that were to say SSH -I, a file that now has better permissions, EC2 user, at an IP address, do you think it will work?
Yes. No, I think it.
I think it will too. And one small caveat, I could have taken away write permission, so I don't accidentally erase my file or change it in some ways of the file too. And I often will do that. But the only real problem was the group and other. All right, here we go. All of that work to get to a new machine, and voila.
Hooray.
Yay, we're in. Notice that I'm in as the EC2 user. That user has sudo permissions, so it can do things like root. In fact, the first thing it tells me to do is I need to upgrade some security packages because that image has a couple of things that have been updated since it was created. So that AMI is, probably a day or two old, and some new things have come out since then. And that is OpenSSL H. Okay, it's a little older than I thought. But either way, that's how it works. That's how you get to a machine. If you were to watch this video and have it handy on the side, do you think you would be able to completely build a machine from scratch and connect to it without any other assistance?
Yes, I think it explains everything pretty clear. I especially like the gotchas to look out for.
Good. Yeah. I think the permission gotcha is probably the biggest one. Any other questions?
Just out of curiosity, maybe this is going a little too complicated, but if you were to create a instance that you want to share with other people, mm-hmm. How would you set it up differently with the keys? It seems like
that's not really specific to an instance. Mm-hmm. It is how, like, a whole permission and keys. You can actually create keys for the account. Mm-hmm. That is a very good question. I will actually take it offline only because it could get a really long conversation. I don't want to confuse anyone watching, but I will stop the video after we're done here, and then I'll explain that to you. And we can make another video just on file permissions on that. But the short answer is, you would do an SSH keygen, you would create new keys for the accounts, and then the account that needs to be shared, you would actually authorize each of those keys to access that account.
Okay.
And I will show you how we can do that in a little bit.
Sounds like it might be a good topic for a video.
Probably not a bad idea if we actually did it for another video as well. Good. All right, so any other questions?
Nope.
You're awesome. Thank you so much for letting me go through all of that. It gives me a great audience to talk to. It helps me stay at a pace that makes sense, and it helps me catch things. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure's all mine.
All right. We will talk soon. I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast, and I will contact you in another way in a little bit. All right. Have a good day.